Hi, welcome to Fun and Friends. I'm Avalon.
I'm Sabrina.
And welcome to our part 1 of Vampire Diaries. Book 1. The Awakening and the Struggle. Now, we have kind of a story with this.
We made a boo-boo.
Yeah, we made a boo-boo. We accidentally read the first book out of the second part of the series because it said volume 1. So we know a couple of little spoilers. Little spoilers. But we will not be talking about them in this video. If you want to hear some spoilers, go look at that video and check it out. But we're going to start with the first book.
We do also have an Instagram account if you want to follow us for some behind the scenes stuff and seeing us being goofy and when things malfunction, and just kind of the more raw, authentic
like it just
side
happened
of us together. Because this is my best friend of over 20 years, so we're pretty silly together. So if you want to check that out, go ahead, follow us on Instagram, and then follow our YouTube channel as well. Come along with us.
And one last little teeny tiny disclaimer. This is not an audiobook. This is a book discussion. I am reading to my friend who is very savvy in media.
Yes.
So she has watched Vampire Diaries. She's
Twilight,
all of those kind of movies, books, TV show, not books.
Not books. Well, I did read the Twilight series.
Yes.
But all the other TV shows or movies that are a book series, I haven't really read.
So this is me reading to her books that I have read and then discussing them with her and kind of comparing and contrasting with the movies
and TV shows.
So this is more of a book discussion, but we do encourage you to follow along. I'll leave a link to the book in the description, and then also a link to the audiobook if you're looking for more of an audiobook rather than a discussion. Which will probably be a link on Amazon.
Yes, there will be.
All right. Let's go get started. Yes. Vampire Diaries by L.J. Smith. September 4th. Dear Diary, something awful is going to happen today. And then she kind of crossed it out. I don't know why I wrote that. That's crazy. There's no reason for me to be upset and every reason for me to be happy. But here I am at 5:30 in the morning, awake and scared. I keep telling myself it's just that I'm all messed up from the time difference between France and here. But that doesn't explain why I feel so scared, so lost. The day before yesterday, while Aunt Judith and Margaret and I were driving back from the airport, I had such a strange feeling. When we turned onto our street, I suddenly thought, Mom and Dad are waiting for us at home. I bet they'll be in the front porch or in the living room looking out the window. They must have missed me so much. I know, that sounds totally crazy. But even when I saw the house and the empty front porch, I still felt that way. I ran up the steps and I tried the door and knocked with the knocker. And when Aunt Judith unlocked the door, I burst inside and I stood in the hallway listening, expecting to hear Mom coming down the stairs or Dad coming from the den. Just then, Aunt Judith let a suitcase crash down on the floor behind me, and I sighed a huge sigh and said, We're home. And Aunt Judith laughed, and the most horrible feeling I've ever felt in my life came over me. I've never felt so utterly and completely lost. Home. I'm home. Why does that sound like a lie? I was born here in Fells Church. I've always lived in this house. Always. This is my same old bedroom with a scorch mark on the floorboards where Caroline and I tried to sneak cigarettes in 5th grade and nearly choked ourselves. I can look out the window and see the big quince tree. Do you know what a quince is?
I have no idea what that type of tree is, but if you guys know, put it in the comments.
Please put it in the comments so we know.
Yeah.
I think it's a fruit, but I don't know. It'd be worth a try. Maybe we'll do a video of trying quinces.
If it's a thing.
Maybe we'll do a video of it. Okay. Oh my gosh, I lost my spot. Where is the quince? Matt and the guys climbed up to crash my birthday slumber party 2 years ago. This is my bed, my chair, my dresser. But right now, everything looks strange to me as if I don't belong here. It's me that's out of place, and the worst thing is, I feel there's somewhere I do not belong, but I just can't. Somewhere I belong, but I just can't find it. I was too tired yesterday to go to orientation. Meredith picked up a schedule for me, but I didn't feel like talking to her on the phone. Aunt Judith told everyone who called that I had jet lag and was sleeping, but she watched me at dinner with a funny look on her face. I got to see the crowd today, though. We're supposed to meet in the parking lot before school. Is that why I'm so scared? Am I frightened of them? Elena stopped writing. She stared at the last line she'd written and then shook her head, pen hovering over the small book with blue velvet cover. Then, with a sudden gesture, she lifted her head, threw the pen and the book at the big bay window, where they bounced off harmlessly and landed on the upholstered window seat. It was completely ridiculous. Since when had she, Elena Gilbert, been scared of meeting people? Since when has she been scared of anything? She stood up angrily, thrust her arms into her red silk kimono. She didn't even glance at the elaborate Victorian mirror above the cherry wood dresser. She knew what she'd see. Elena Gilbert, cool and blonde and slender, the fashion trendsetter, the high school senior, the girl every boy wanted and every girl wanted to be, who just now had an unaccustomed scowl on her face and a pinch in her mouth. A hot bath and some coffee and I'll calm down, she thought. The morning ritual of washing and dressing was soothing, and she dawdled over it. Sorting up her new outfits from Paris, she chose a pale rose top and white linen shorts combo that made her look like a raspberry sundae. Good enough to eat, she thought, and the mirror showed a girl with a secret smile. Her earlier fears had melted away and forgotten. Elena, where are you? You're going to be late for school. The voice drifted faintly from below. Elena ran a brush one time through her silky hair and pulled it into a deep rose ribbon. Then she grabbed her backpack and went downstairs. In the kitchen, 4-year-old Margaret was eating cereal at the kitchen table, and Aunt Judith was burning something on the stove. Aunt Judith was the sort of woman who always looked vaguely flustered. She had a thin, mild face and light flyaway hair pushed back untidy. Elena landed a peck on her cheek. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I don't have time for breakfast. But Elena, you can't just go off without eating. You need your protein. I'll get a donut before school, said Elena briskly. She dropped a kiss on Margaret's toe head. It's toe is in car, but I'm thinking it's like when you're so blonde that it looks like your skill. Yeah, it matches like your skin, so you have like a head that looks like a toe. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I think so too.
Okay, and turned to go. But Elena, and I'll probably go home with Bonnie or Meredith after school, so don't wait for dinner. Bye, Elena. She was already out the front door. She closed it behind her, cutting off Aunt Judith's distant protests, and stepped out onto the front porch and stopped. All the bad feelings of the morning rushed over her again. The anxiety, the fear, the certainty that something terrible was about to happen. Maple Street was deserted. The tall Victorian homes looked strange and distant, as if they might be empty inside, like the houses on an abandoned movie set. They looked as if they were empty of people, but full of strange watching things.
I feel like she's being stalked by a vampire. And maybe that's why she's getting all these urges or feelings of scared and anxiety and this built up of anticipation of something really bad's gonna happen.
You know, that feeling that you get when you pull up to a light and somebody's looking at you, and then you're like,
boom, what you looking at?
And then you're you get that prickle in the back of your neck, and you're like, ah!
That dreadful heaviness that comes over your shoulders.
Yeah,
I think that's what's happening.
That was it. Something was watching her. Ooh, good prediction. The sky overhead was not blue, not milky and opaque. Not blue, but milky and opaque, like a giant bowl turned upside down. The air was stifling, and Elena felt sure there were eyes on her.
My first prediction.
She caught sight of something dark in the branches of the old quince tree in the front of her house. We do need to try quinces.
We do.
She caught sight of something dark in the branches. Oh, I already said that. It was a crow, sitting as still as the yellow tinged leaves around it. And it was the thing watching her. She tried to tell herself that was ridiculous, but somehow she knew it was the biggest crow she had ever seen, plump and sleek with rainbows shining in its black feathers. She could see every detail of it clearly, the greedy dark claws, the sharp beak, the single glittering black eye. It was so motionless that it might have been a wax model of a bird sitting there. But But as she stared at it, Elena felt herself flush slowly, heat coming in waves from her throat and cheeks, because it was looking at her, looking the way boys look at her when she wore a bathing suit or a sheer blouse, as if he were undressing her with his eyes. Before she realized what she was doing, she had dropped her backpack and picked up a stone from beside the driveway. "Get it out of here," she said, and heard the shaking anger in her own voice. "Go on! Go away!" With the last word, she threw the stone. There was an explosion of leaves, but the crow soared up unharmed. Its wings were huge, and they made enough racket for a whole flock of crows. Elena crouched, suddenly panicked as it flapped directly over her head. The wind from its wings ruffled her blonde hair. But it swooped up again and circled, a black silhouette against the paper-white sky. Then, one harsh croak, it wheeled away towards the woods. Elena straightened up slowly, then glanced around, self-conscious. She couldn't believe what she had just done. But now that the bird was gone, the sky felt ordinary again. A little wind made the leaves flutter, and Elena took a deep breath. Down the street, a door opened. Several children poured out laughing. She smiled at them and took another breath, relief sweeping through her like sunlight. How could she have been so silly? This was a beautiful day, full of promise, and nothing bad was going to happen. Nothing bad was going to happen except that she was going to be late for getting to school. The whole crowd would be waiting for her in the parking lot. She could always tell everyone, "You stopped to throw stones at a peeping Tom," she thought, and almost giggled. Now that would have given them something to think about. Without a backwards glance at the quince tree, she began to walk as slowly as she could down the street. There's that quince tree again.
It's there. That's the third time it's been mentioned.
The crow crashed through the top of the massive oak, and Stefan's head jerked up reflexively. When he saw it was the only bird, he relaxed. His eyes dropped to the limp white form in his hands, and he felt a twist of regret. He hadn't meant to kill it. He would have hunted something larger than a rabbit if he had known how hungry he was. But of course, that was the very thing that frightened him, never knowing how strong the hunger would be, or what he might have to do to satisfy it. He was lucky that this time he only killed a rabbit. He stood beneath the ancient oak trees, sunlight filtering down his curly hair. In jeans and a t-shirt, Stefan Salvatore looked exactly like a normal high school student. He wasn't. Deep in the woods, there was where no one would see him. He'd come to feed. Now he licked his gums and lips painstakingly to make sure there was no stain on them. He didn't want to take any chances. This masquerade was going to be hard to pull off as it was. For a moment he wondered if he should just give it up. Perhaps he would go back to Italy, back to his hiding place. What made him think that he could rejoin the world of daylight? But he was tired of living in the shadows. He was tired of the darkness and of the things that lived in it. Most of all, he was tired of being alone. He wasn't sure why he'd chosen Fells Church, Virginia. It was a young town, by his standards. The oldest buildings had been put up only a century and a half ago, but memories and ghosts of Civil War still lived here, as real as the supermarkets and the fast food joints. Stefan appreciated the respect for the past. He thought he might come to like the people of Fells Church, and perhaps, just perhaps, he might find a place among them. He'd never be accepted completely, of course. A bitter smile curved his lips at the idea. He knew better than to hope for that. There would never be a place where he could belong completely, where he could truly be himself, unless he chose to belong to the shadows. He slapped the thought away. He'd renounced the darkness. He'd left the shadows behind. He was blotting all those long years out and starting afresh today. Stefan realized he was still holding the rabbit. Gently, he laid it down on the bed of oak leaves, far away, too far from the human ears to pick up. He recognized the noises of a fox. "Come along, brother hunter," he thought sadly. "Your breakfast is waiting." He slung his jacket over his shoulder. He noticed the crow had disturbed him earlier. It was perched in the oak tree and seemed to be watching him. There was a wrongness about it. He started to send a probing thought towards it to examine the bird, and stopped himself. Remember your promise, he thought. You don't use your powers unless it's absolutely necessary, not unless there's no other choice. Moving along silently along the dead leaves and dry twigs, he made his way towards the edge of the woods. His car was parked there. He glanced back once and saw that the crow had left the branches and dropped down on the rabbit. There was something sinister in the way it spread its wings over the limp white body, something sinister and triumphant. Stefan's throat tightened, and he almost strode back to chase the bird away. Still, it had as much right to eat the fox as the fox did, he told himself. As much right as he did. If he encountered the bird again, he'd look into its mind, he decided. Just now, he tore his eyes from the sight of it and hurried on through the woods, jaws set. He didn't want to be late, arriving at Robert E. Lee High School. So there's chapter 1, end of chapter 1.
That's pretty interesting so far. It's way different from the series. Like how it starts out. It's
Yes.
way different from the series.
I mean, is it though? I mean, Stefan was in hiding in the show and decided to live kind of a normal life in the show, but he
Right.
wasn't coming from Italy, and he had lived in the area before.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's some of the backstory is a little bit different, but I feel like a lot of the beginning points are the same. What do you think about the crow? Any predictions on that?
My feeling is that the crow is probably somebody that they know that like shapeshifts. Like, I don't remember all the characters because it's been a little bit since I watched Vampire Diaries, but there's like one that can shapeshift.
Is there?
Wasn't there? Or maybe I'm thinking of Teen Wolf. I don't know.
I think you're thinking of
Teen
Teen Wolf.
Wolf.
Actually, I think you're thinking of True Blood, to be
Or
honest.
True Blood, yeah. See, I watch all of them and then I get them all confused because they all are like similar, but then not. And I think the crow represents somebody, or it is somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that maybe Stefan knows.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe
Or-
like some inkling of their past, and it's kind of like a foreshadowing of something bad that's about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think so.
Should we-
It means something. I know that. And those quince trees. We need to find out what those
what those are is, and maybe we'll do like a taste test video, just
Yeah.
because I don't think either of us have ever had a quince. I don't even know if I'm saying it right. I hope I'm saying it right.
probably are.
Let's see chapter 2. I think we'll probably have enough time for chapter 2 in this episode.
Possibly.
This is a pretty long one. I think we'll be able to make it.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Chapter 2. Elena was surrounded the instant she stepped into the high school parking lot. Everyone was there, the whole crowd she hadn't seen since late June, plus 4 or 5 hanger-ons who hoped to gain popularity by association. One by one, she accepted the welcoming hugs of her own group. Caroline had grown at least an inch and was slinkier and more like a Vogue model than ever. She greeted Elena coolly and stepped back again, her green eyes narrowed like a cat's. Bonnie hadn't grown at all, and her curly red hair barely came up to Elena's chin as she flung her arms around Elena. Wait a minute, curls? Thought Elena. She pushed the smaller girl back. Bonnie, what did you do to your hair? Do you like it? I think it makes me look taller. Do you like it? I think it makes me look taller. Bonnie fluffed up the already fluffy bangs and smiled, her brown eyes sparkling with excitement, her little heart-shaped face alight. Elena moved on. Meredith, you haven't changed at all. This hug was equally warm on both sides. She had missed Meredith more than anyone, Elena thought, looking at the tall girl. Meredith never wore any makeup, but then her perfect olive skin and heavy black lashes, she didn't need any. Right now, she had one elegant eyebrow raised as she studied Elena. Well, your hair is 2 shades lighter than the sun, but where's your tan? I thought you were living it up on the French Riviera. You know I never tan. Elena held up her hands for her own inspection. The skin was flawless like porcelain, but almost as fair and as translucent as Bonnie's. Just a minute. This reminds me, Bonnie interjected, snatching one of Elena's hands. Guess what I learned from my cousin this summer? Before anyone could speak, she informed them triumphantly. Palm reading! There were groans and some laughter. Laugh while you can, said Bonnie, not at all disturbed. My cousin told me I'm a psychic. Now let me see. She peered into Elena's palm. Hurry up or we're going to be late, said Elena a bit impatiently. All right. Now this is your lifeline, or is it your heartline? In the crowd, someone snickered. Quiet, I'm reaching into the void. I see. All at once, Bonnie's face went blank as if she were startled. Her brown eyes widened, but she no longer seemed to be staring at Elena's hand. It was as if she were looking through it at something frightening. You will meet a tall, dark stranger, Meredith murmured from behind her. There's a flurry of giggles. Dark, yes, and a stranger, but not tall. Bonnie's voice was hushed and far away. Although, she continued after a moment, looking puzzled, he was tall once. Her wide brown eyes lifted to Elena's in bewilderment. But that's impossible, wasn't it? She dropped Elena's hand, almost flinging it away. I don't want to see anymore. Okay, show's over, let's go, Elena told the others, vaguely irritated. She always felt psychic tricks were just that, tricks. So why was she annoyed? Just because that morning she almost freaked out herself? The girls started towards the school building, but the roar of finely tuned motors stopped them in their tracks. Well now, Caroline said, staring. Quite a car. Quite a Porsche, Meredith corrected dryly. The sleek black 911 Turbo purred in the parking lot, searching for a space, moving as lazily as a panther stalking its prey. When the car came to a stop, the door opened, and they glanced at the driver. Oh my God, Caroline whispered. You can say that again, breathed Bonnie. From where they stood, Elena could see he had a lean, flat-muscled body, faded jeans he probably had to peel off at night, tight shirt, and a leather jacket of unusual cut. His hair was wavy and dark. He wasn't tall, though, just average height. Elena let out her breath. Who is that masked man? Said Meredith, and the remark was apt. Dark sunglasses completely covered the boy's eyes, shielding his face like a mask. That masked stranger, someone else said, and a babble of voices rose up. Do you see that jacket? That's Italian, as in Roma. How would you know? You've never been farther than Rome. New York is in your life. Uh-oh. Elena's got that look again, the hunting look. Short, dark, and handsome, but better be careful. He isn't short, he's perfect. Through the chatter, Caroline's voice suddenly rang out. Oh, come on, Elena, you've already got Matt. What more do you want? What can you do with two that you can't do with just one? The same thing, only longer, dawdled Meredith. The group dissolved into laughter. We all know what that means.
We sure do.
We sure do. These are high schoolers, too.
We'll leave it at that.
We'll just leave it at that. The boy had locked his car and was walking around the school. Casually, Elena started after him, the other girls right behind her in a close-knit pack. For an instant, annoyance bubbled up inside her. Couldn't she go anywhere without a parade on her heels? But Meredith caught her eye and smiled in spite of herself. No noblesse oblige, Meredith said softly. What? If you're going to be queen of the school, you have to put up with the consequences. Elena frowned as they entered the building. A long corridor stretched before them, and a figure in jeans and a leather jacket was disappearing through the office doorway ahead. Elena slowed her pace as she walked up to the office, finally stopping to glance thoughtfully at the messages on the cork bulletin board by the door. There was a large window there, through which the entire office was visible. The other girls were openly gazing through the window and giggling. Nice rear view. That was definitely an Armani jacket. Where do you think he's from? Out of state? Elena was straining her ears for the boy's name. There seemed to be some kind of trouble there. Mrs. Clark, the admissions secretary, was looking at a list and shaking her head. The boy said something, and Mrs. Clark shifted her hands in a "what can I say" gesture. She ran a finger down the list and shook her head again, conclusively. The boy started to turn away and turned back, and when Mrs. Clark looked up at him again, her expression changed. The boy's sunglasses were now in his hand, and Mrs. Clark seemed to be Startled by something, Elena could see her blink several times, her lips open and close as if she were trying to speak. Isn't that like compulsion?
It is like compulsion.
I'm pretty sure he did the same thing in the first episode.
I think he did.
Like, I vaguely remember that.
Me too. I know Edward Cullen did that too.
Those boys getting into schools.
Them boys. They're cute boys too.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't not
compelling
say no.
yourself into school? Dude, you wouldn't have to compel me to get you into school. Just
come on in.
Come on in. Elena wished she could see more of the back of the boy's head. Mrs. Clark was fumbling through the piles of paper now, looking dazed. At last she found a form of some kind and wrote on it, and turned it around and pushed it towards the boy. The boy wrote briefly on the form, signing it, probably, and returned it. Mrs. Clark stared at it for a second, then fumbled with a new pile of papers, finally handing what looked like a class schedule to him. Her eyes never left the boy's as he took it, inclined his head in thanks, and turned toward the door. Elena was wild with curiosity now. What had just happened in there? And what did the stranger's face look like? But as he emerged from the office, he was settling his sunglasses into place. Disappointment coursed through her. Still, she could see the rest of his face as he paused in the doorway. The dark, curly hair framed features so fine that they might have been taken from an old Roman coin or medallion. High cheekbones, classical straight nose, and a mouth to keep you awake at night, Elena thought. The upper lip was beautifully sculpted, a little sensitive, a whole lot sensual. The chatter of girls in the hallway, which stopped as if someone had thrown a switch. Most of them were turning away from the boy now, looking anywhere but at him. Elena held her place by the window and gave a little toss of her head, pulling the ribbon out of her hair so that it fell loose around her shoulders. Without looking to either side, the boy moved on down the hallway. You know what that's like? You know when you, in high school, when you saw that boy and you walked by like 5 times and you're just like,
Yes, all about that. I remember we did that a few times.
Oh, yeah.
Our whole group of girls.
You're just like, okay,
found
we gotta
that one senior, and we're just like, whoa.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm right here.
A chorus of sighs and whispers flared up the moment he was out of earshot. Elena didn't hear any of it. He walked right by her, she thought, dazed, right by without even a glance. Dimly, she realized the bell was ringing. Meredith was tugging on her arm. What? I said, here's her schedule. We've got Trig on the 2nd floor right now. Come on. It's a little narcissistic of her.
A little bit.
He didn't look at me. It's his first day, and he didn't look at me.
How dare he?
I don't know. That's just how I'm feeling.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Narcissistic.
A little bit. Elena allowed Meredith to propel her down the corridor, up a flight of stairs, and into a classroom. She slid into an empty seat automatically and fixed her eyes on the teacher at the front without really seeing her. The shock still hadn't worn off. He'd walked right by, without a glance. She couldn't remember how long it had been since a boy had done that. They all looked at least once. Some whistled, some stopped to talk, some just stared. And that had always just been fine with Elena. After all, what was more important than boys? They were the mark of how popular you were, of how beautiful you were, and they could be useful for all sorts of things. Sometimes they were exciting, but usually they didn't last long. Sometimes they were creeps from the beginning. Most boys, Elena reflected, were like puppies, adorable in their place, but expendable. Julie, did you hear that? Puppies are expendable. How do you feel about this?
No.
I don't think he approves.
Yes. Dogs, no.
Depends on the boy.
Mm.
Depends on the boy. Very few could be more than that. Like, could be real friends. Like Matt. Oh, Matt. Last year, she'd hoped that he would be the one she was looking for. The boy that could make her feel, well, something more. More than a rush of triumph at making a conquest. The pride of showing your new acquisition off to the other girls. And she had come to feel a strong affection for Matt. But over the summer, when she had time to think, she realized it was the affection of a cousin or a sister. Miss Helplin was passing but trigonometry books. I think we need an editor here.
That is an editor problem. But was passing.
Well, I'm going to read it the way I'm going to read it. Miss Heplin was passing out trigonometry books.
There we go.
Elena took hers methodically and wrote her name inside, still wrapped in thought. She liked Matt more than any other boy she'd known, and that was why she was going to have to tell him it was over. She hadn't known how to tell him in a letter. She didn't know how to tell him now. It wasn't that she was afraid he'd kiss up a fuss. He just wouldn't understand. She didn't really understand herself. It was as if she was always searching for something. Only when she thought she got it, it wasn't there. Not with Matt. Not with any of the boys she'd had. And then she had to start all over again. Fortunately, there was always fresh material. No boy ever resisted her successfully, and no boy had ever ignored her until now.
That narcissism.
I know. I know. Oh my gosh. Were we that bad? I don't think so.
No, I was too insecure to think like that about myself in high school.
I think I was pretty insecure too.
I was way too insecure. Like, yeah, I'm small, tiny. Like, you can't see me.
Yeah.
I blend into the walls.
I think I was more focused on friends than guys. Though I did definitely have guys.
You did. I did not. But you did, yes. I was more focused on friends and color guard because that was like the life.
Yeah.
That was our life.
Yeah. Except for me, it was band.
Band. Yeah.
Me being a bit of a nerd.
Mm-hmm.
The bell rang and everyone flooded out of the classroom, but Elena paused in the doorway. She bit her lip, scanning the river of students flowing through the hall. Then she spotted one of the hanger-ons from the parking lot. Francis, come here. Francis came eagerly, her plain face brightening. Listen, Francis, you remember the boy from this morning? With the Porsche and the assets? How could I forget? Well, I want his class schedule.
You know what this reminds me of? When we had a specific students at our school who ended up driving a Dodge Challenger when they first came out.
The
and
movie
everybody,
star.
our movie star, and then everybody was talking about it in the car. He had the nicest car in the parking lot, and all the girls were gawking over it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of annoying.
Yeah, he was a movie star.
Yeah.
And so he was like occasionally gone from school because he was filming movies.
A couple months at a time.
But like when he would come back, he would always drive like nice ass cars to
school. High school.
And so like all the girls were like all over that.
All the time. We're not going to put his name because that's not fair to him, but this just reminded me of that instance of what happened at our high school.
Yeah.
So anyways, distraction. Anyway. Connection, but distraction.
Francis came eagerly. We already read that. With the Porsche and the assets, how could I forget? Well, I want his class schedule. Get it from the office if you can, or copy it from him if you have to, but do it. Francis looked surprised for a moment and then grinned and nodded. Okay, Elena, I'll try. I'll meet you at lunch if I can get it. Thanks. Elena watched the girl go. You know, you're really crazy, Meredith's voice said in her ear. What's the use of being a queen of the school if you can't pull a little rank sometimes, returned Elena calmly. Where do I go now? General business. Here, take it yourself. Meredith thrust the schedule at her. I've got to run for chemistry. Later. General business and the rest of the morning passed in a blur. Elena had hoped to catch another glimpse of the new student, but he was in none of her classes. Matt was in one, and she felt a pang as the blue eyes met hers with a smile. At the lunch bell, she nodded greetings right and left as she walked in the cafeteria. Catherine was outside, poised casually against the wall with chin up, shoulders back, hips forwards. The two boys she was talking to fell silent, and they nudged each other as Elena approached. Hi, Elena said bravely to the boys and to Caroline, ready to go get in and eat? Caroline's green eyes barely flicked towards Elena, and she pushed glossy auburn hair out of her face. What, at the royal table? She said. Elena was taken back. She and Caroline had been friends since kindergarten, and they had always competed with each other good-naturedly. But lately something happened to Caroline. She began to take the rivalry more and more seriously, and now Elena was surprised at the bitterness in the other girl's voice. Well, it's hardly as if you were a commoner, she said lightly. Oh, you're so right about that, said Caroline, turning to face Elena fully. Those green cat eyes were slitted and smoky, and Elena was shocked by the hostility she saw there. The two boys smiled uneasily and edged away. Caroline didn't seem to notice. A lot of things have changed while you were gone this summer, Elena, she continued. And just maybe your time on the throne is running out. Elena felt flushed. She could feel it. She struggled to keep her voice steady. Maybe, she said, but I wouldn't buy a scepter just yet if I were you, Caroline. She turned and went into the lunchroom. It was a relief to see Meredith and Bonnie and Frances beside them. Elena felt her cheeks cool as she selected her table and went to join them. She wouldn't let Caroline upset her. She wouldn't think of Caroline at all. I got it, said Frances, waving a piece of paper as Elena sat down. And I have some good stuff, said Bonnie importantly. Elena, listen to this. He's in my biology class, and I sit right across from him. His name is Stefan Salvatore, and he's from Italy, and he's boarding with the old Miss Flowers on the edge of town. She sighed. He is so romantic. Caroline dropped her books, and he picked him up for her. Elena made a wry face. How clumsy of Caroline. What else happened? Well, that's all. He didn't really talk to her. He's very mysterious, you see. Miss Endicott, my biology teacher, tried to get him to take off his glasses, but he wouldn't. He has a medical condition. What kind of medical condition? I don't know. Maybe it's terminal and his days are numbered. Wouldn't that be romantic? Wrong.
That's not quite romantic.
No. That would be tragic, especially because they're high school students.
It is. It's like that comment reminds me of the movie Fault in the Stars.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. That was sad.
Maybe they're romanticizing it because of books like that.
Probably.
But
I think that's romantic.
I mean, living through that would be really traumatic. I think, especially as a high school student.
Yeah, I would not want to go through that.
Oh, very, said Meredith. Elena was looking over Frances's sheet of paper, biting her lip. He's in my second period European history. Anybody have that class? I do, said Bonnie, and I think Caroline does too. Oh, and maybe Matt? He said something yesterday about how it was just as like getting Mr. Tanner. Marvelous, Elena thought, picking up a fork and stabbing at her mashed potatoes. It looked as if 7th period was going to be extremely interesting. Stefan was glad the school day was almost over. He wanted to get out of these crowded rooms and corridors for just a few minutes. So many minds, the pressure of so many thought patterns, so many mental voices surrounding him, it was making him dizzy. It had been years since he had been in a swarm of people like this. One mind in particular stood out from the others. She had been among those watching him in the main corridor of the school building. He didn't know what she looked like, but her personality was powerful. He felt sure he'd recognize it again. So far, at least, he'd survived the first day of the masquerade. He used the powers only twice, and then sparingly. But he was tired, and he admitted ruefully he was hungry. The rabbit hadn't been enough.
I think that's a good stopping point right now.
That's a good stopping point?
Yeah.
I mean, we're almost to the end. Let's just finish it up. It's like a couple more pages.
Okay.
Worry about that later. He found his last classroom and sat down, and immediately he felt the presence of that mind again. It glowed at the edge of his consciousness.
What happened?
Oh no. Okay, it's still recording.
Okay,
we're good. We're good. Almost technical malfunction.
Almost.
Bad. So now we know we need to change that setting. We don't want it to go.
No.
So that's great. Apparently,
Not
my
at all.
computer was getting bored with me.
Apparently.
It glowed at the edge of consciousness, a golden light, soft and yet vibrant, and for the first time, he could locate the girl it was coming from. She was seated right in front of him. Even as he thought it, she turned around and he saw her face. It was all he could do not to gasp in shock. Catherine! But of course it couldn't be. Catherine was dead. No one knew that better than he did. Still, the resemblance was uncanny. The pale golden hair, so fair, it seemed to shimmer, the creamy skin, which had always made him think of swans or alabaster, flushing faintly pink over the cheekbones. And the eyes, Catherine's eyes had been the color he had never seen before, darker than the sky blue, as rich as lapis lazuli in a jeweled headband. This girl had those same eyes, and they were fixed directly on his as he smiled. He looked down from the smile quickly. Of all things, he did not want to think about Catherine. He didn't want to look at this girl who reminded him of her, and he didn't want to feel her presence any longer. He kept his eyes on the desk, blocking his mind as strongly as he knew how, and last, slowly, she turned around again. She was hurt. Even through the blocks, he could feel that. He didn't care. In fact, he was glad of it, and he hoped it would keep her away from him. Other than that, he had no feelings about her at all. He kept telling himself this as he sat, the droning voice of the teacher pouring over him unheard. But he could smell the subtle hint of perfume, violets, he thought, and a slender white neck that was bowed over a book, the fair hair falling on either side of it. In anger and frustration, he recognized the seductive feeling of his teeth, more a tinkling than an ache. It was the hunger, a specific hunger, and not one he was about to indulge. The teacher was pacing about the room like a ferret asking questions, and Stefan deliberately fixed his attention on the man. At first he was puzzled, for although none of the students knew the answers, the questions kept coming. Then he realized that was the man's purpose, to shame the students with what they didn't know. Just now he found another victim, a small girl with clusters of red curls and a heart-shaped face.
Bonnie.
I know, Bonnie.
Poor Bonnie.
Stefan watched in distaste as the teacher badgered her with questions. She looked wretched as he turned away from her to address the entire class. See what I mean? You think you're pretty hot. Steph, your senior is now ready to graduate. Well, let me tell you, some of you aren't ready to graduate kindergarten like this. He gestured towards the red-haired girl. No idea about the French Revolution. Thinks Marie Antoinette was a silent film star. Students all around Stefan were shifting uncomfortably. He could feel the resentment in their minds and the humiliation and the fear. They were all afraid of this thin little man with eyes like a weasel, even the husky boys who were taller than his. I feel like I had a lot of teachers like that in college too.
Yeah, especially college.
Yeah.
Especially college.
They would say things like, well, how did you even get here?
Yeah.
Like, to some of the students, I'm like,
how are you adults? How are you, like, a thinking individual?
It's
how
like,
where's your critical thinking skills?
I'm here to learn from you. So don't make me feel bad.
Because a lot of the stuff that we were taught in college, we weren't taught in high school. So we're, like, playing catch-up almost.
Yeah, and it was kind of, but the other thing is, like, a lot of the classes that those were in were classes that we were required to take, and we were there to learn it, you know? So don't make us feel bad for being there. Be happy that we've come to join you.
Exactly. Like, I don't know. Make it a good, happy, like, environment.
Yeah. Because you want it to be positive.
Yes.
All right, let's try another era. The teacher swung back at the same girl he had been questioning. During the Renaissance, he broke off. You do know the Renaissance is, don't you? The period between the 13th and 17th centuries in which Europe discovered the great ideas of the ancient Greek and Rome. The period that produced so many of Europe's greatest artists and thinkers. When the girl nodded confusedly, he continued. During the Renaissance, what would students your age be doing at school? Well, any idea at all? Any guesses? The girl swallowed hard. With a weak smile, she said, playing football? At the ensuing laughter, the teacher's face darkened. Hardly, he snapped. The classroom quieted. You think this is a joke? Well, in those days, students your age would already be proficient in several languages. They would have mastered logic, mathematics, astronomy, physiology, and grammar. They would also be ready to go into a university in which every course was taught in Latin. Football would be especially the last thing on. Excuse me. The quiet voice stopped the teacher in mid-harangue. Everybody turned to stare at Stefan. What? What did you say? I said, excuse me, Stefan repeated, removing his glasses and standing up. But you're wrong. Students in the Renaissance were encouraged to participate in sports. They were taught that a healthy body goes with a healthy mind. And they certainly played team sports like cricket, tennis, and even football. He turned to the red-haired girl and smiled, and she smiled back gratefully. To the teacher, he added, But the most important things they learned were good manners and courtesy. I'm sure your book will tell you that. Students were groaning. The teacher's face was red with blood, and he was spurting. But Stefan continued to hold eyes, and after a minute, it was the teacher who looked away. The bell rang. Stefan put his glasses on quickly and gathered up his books. He had already drawn more attention to himself than he should, and he didn't want to look at the blonde-haired girl again. Besides, he needed to get out of there quickly. There was a familiar burning sensation in his veins. As he reached the door, someone shouted, "Hey! Did they really play football back then?" He couldn't help but throwing a grin over his shoulder. "Oh yes, sometimes with severed heads of prisoners of war." That was a little dark. But, I mean, he is a vampire, so he probably,
knows the history a little bit more.
That, but also is, I don't care about the darkness as much. I drain blood for food.
People.
So severed heads doesn't freak me out as much.
Mm-hmm.
Elena watched him as he went. He deliberately turned away from her. He'd snubbed her on purpose in front of Caroline, who'd been watching like a hawk. Tears burned in her eyes, but at that moment, only one thought burned in her mind. She'd have him, even if it killed her. Even if it killed both of them, she would have him.
That's obsessive.
A little bit obsessive, and that's where we're going to stop today. Well, yikes.
A lot.
That was a lot. So Elena's starting school again. Sounds like she spent all of her summer in France. With her aunt.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, how many high schoolers get to go to France?
That.
I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Summer.
We still don't have any backstory on what happened to her mom and dad.
Yeah.
We
don't know about the little girl, the 4-year-old. I think it's her niece.
I want to say it's her niece.
I feel like that's the aunt's kid.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Yeah. And the crow, I still don't know.
It doesn't sound like there's a Jeremy.
Yeah, I was just thinking that when you were talking about possibly her being her sister. I'm like, there's no Jeremy yet. There's no brother.
Yeah. So. And
she's blonde.
Yeah, so she sounds more like the Caroline from the show, and then Caroline sounds more like Elena in the show.
Yeah.
So they kind of
reversed it.
Mm-hmm.
They do. I'm trying to remember who that teacher reminds me of. He reminds me of a high school teacher.
We're not going to use any names.
We're not, but he reminds me of a high school teacher. I think it was a science teacher.
Oh, I know which science teacher I think you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. He literally would go up to him and be like, he would just pass out a bunch of worksheets. He wouldn't tell you do any instruction, and then if you
ask questions,
he's like, yeah, he would be like, "You're so stupid. Why don't you just go and ask somebody else? Don't bother me. I'm playing solitaire."
Yeah, he would do that. And then there was the one Spanish teacher that was just awful.
Oh, I didn't have that one.
I didn't either, but
Javier.
Oops. No, it's not. No, not that one. It's another one that was very anti-America.
Oh.
You need to speak Spanish in my Spanish class. Only Spanish.
I didn't have him, but I know of a friend who had him.
Yeah. And every time we had to do the Pledge of Allegiance, I didn't have him, but one of my friends had him, and then my brother had him. And every time it came, because we had the time where we had to do the Pledge of Allegiance still, and when we did that, he would just flip off the flag and just. Yeah. He was not happy with.
He would call students gringos and stuff.
Slurred, I don't know what am I thinking of? Slurred bad names in Spanish. If they couldn't catch on to the language fast enough.
And this is a high school class. Really? We're here to learn Spanish. This is the language we chose to learn.
And that's the first time we're learning. A lot of kids are learning another language is in high school.
Yeah.
Where a lot of other countries start them much, much, much younger.
Well, and our school gave us so many choices for different languages. We should be excited that they chose Spanish out of all four.
French, German, American Sign Language.
Yeah.
And they had after school Japanese program. Yeah. So
we had a lot to choose from. So
We did.
Yeah.
It's quite cool. But that's what that scene that we just talked about reminded me of, when this teacher would explode during class if it had anything to do with, like, America.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of teachers are just like stuck in the, well, our old teachers. I'm not going to say every teacher, since I am a teacher. I love teachers. But there are a lot of teachers right there that are just very stuck in their own head, like, why don't you get this? But it's like, you have to remember that you have new students, like, every year, and you got to reteach it every single time. And not every single student's gonna know what you think you should know. So, and it's your job to get them there.
It is.
Not embarrass them with it either.
No.
Yeah.
But you know what also reminded me of that scene? It reminds me of when Edward, like, got a sniff of Bella for the first time in the biology class, when he first when she first moved to Forks, and he's just like trying not to kill her, basically.
Yeah,
or, like, have contact with her.
And he's just like, I don't want to look at her. I don't want to look at her. I don't want to look at her.
That kind of reminds me of it too. And then Elena's, like, actual, like, thirst for Stefan is so strong.
Dude, she's, like, obsessive.
It's yeah.
And Stefan really doesn't want much to do with her. He's just
point,
like,
no.
You look like I'm assuming ex, and like all I want to do is just have a normal life, and she's just like pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, like very stalkery.
Very.
Like,
and the audacity he has to ignore her. The audacity.
The audacity. Me, the queen of the school.
That's all that matters.
I should have any man that I want. They should all be looking at me. And you didn't talk to me in front of my mortal nemesis, Caroline. How could he?
Exactly. Yeah. It sounds very high school-y.
It does sound very high school.
I mean, it's set in high school, but
yeah, and I feel like it is like a very like teenage book and
drama.
I'm wondering, I've read like the first like 2 books, like not just this book. So technically this has 2 books in it, and then there's 2 books in the next one. And I've read basically the first 4, and I know that it's still, from what I remember, is very teenagery, but I'm hoping that like it's like Aragon in the fact that like
I only saw the movie.
I know this is me because I'm working on Aragon right now. I'm not actually in the last book, but as he grows as he gets older and he gets wiser, it gets less teenage drama-y because he's growing as a character. And that's what I'm hoping for this book. Yeah. Is that, like, as the books progress, like, it gets more adult. And I know Harry Potter is kind of the same way. Like, where the first couple of books are very, like, lighthearted. I mean, not as teenage, like, love struck, but more more child friendly. And then as as the books progress, they get darker and darker and darker and darker.
Which is fine because that's how a character is. Like, especially a young character, they are, as a kid, you are more mature and emotionally driven on like your thoughts, actions, and behaviors. And then that changes as, like, you become into your adulthood. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see that transition.
I hope so.
Not that I don't like it. I like it. It just reminds me of, like, high school and that I don't want to go back. I would never want to go back.
I would never want to go back.
I don't want to go back. I don't know. Oh, no. Our first high school reunion's coming up, and I don't even think I want to go to that because it's just... Yeah. I don't know. I don't need to see you.
I don't want to see you.
I don't need to see you. So. But,
I've kept in contact with the people I want to keep in contact with.
Yeah, for
the most part.
10 years. I'm good. I see you all on Facebook. I'm caught up.
Sounds good. All right, well...
That concludes
this episode, and we will get you next week with Chapter 3.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye.